Hello and welcome to this week's Granny's Garden. Now today I am back in my daughter's garden where I'm going to have phase 2 of starting a border from scratch. I have brought a whole load of stuff with me because, as I said in the previous video, which I'll link to at the end of this video, these are newbie gardeners, so their arsenal of garden tools isn't exactly brilliant. So I brought my own, and hopefully I won't have forgotten anything because it's certainly a long way back to my own house. Now, as a brief recap for those who didn't see the previous video, this is the area I'm going to be working on. It is 7 foot wide, 6 foot deep. It had no less than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those stumps are cut, huge Arizona cypress trees, far too big for this space. I've also got to lift 2 sizable oleander roots. Phase 1, I did a reconnaissance, which is where you look for the problems and look to see what you've got to work with, or previous existing things you can make use of. First of all, the problems. Here in this area, as I was measuring, it started to move. So obviously underneath there's some sort of little trapdoor, probably the entrance to water. And that could be of value if I'm going to put a drip system in. So I'm going to uncover that first and see what the heck is underneath there. 2, all of these rocks I'm going to put to one side. Some of them, like these lava rocks, are very, very nice, and I'm certainly going to be making use of them. Of the stumps, I'm going to keep this little one, as I said in the previous video, to put a little tree face on for my little grandson. These 2, not at all. I'm going to remove those. Definitely going to have to remove these oleanders. Problems we've run into. It is full of these little pebbles. Now, in this country, concrete is made of these little pebbles. So obviously they use it as a dumping ground for any of these stones that were left over from making the driveway and making the pathway. This area is also covered in roots. Cypress trees have very superficial roots, and this whole area is covered with them. So they will eventually rot down because, thankfully, when you do cut a cypress tree down, it's gone for good. There's no regrowth, resprouting, suckers, sprouts, nothing. It's gone for good. In a very small area, having 5 cypress trees and oleander bushes, the soil is probably quite depleted. So I actually have brought with me 4 sacks of topsoil to spread over there to give a nice start. And of course, anything I plant is going to have starter fertilizer to give it that little helping hand. So now what we've got to do is get the big guns out. And the big guns out is A.K.A. Miguel, my husband, with the pickaxe and all these little tools I have brought with me. So let's get to work.
you don't want an oleander bush to grow into a tree, keep it cut back to keep the actual branches this size, small, sweet and tender. Do not let it get into a tree trunk.
that is phase 2 of starting a border from scratch, done and dusted. Don't ever panic when you see something that looking like a disaster area. Just sit down and breathe and have a look at it. And start planning the way you always plan a border. And when you start thinking from a planning point of view, then you sort of calm down and you see the future or the potential that area has. The first thing you always do is track the sun. And track the sun depending on the season. I was tracking the sun in midwinter, which is always a worst case scenario. It always improves as the year goes on. But always take into consideration, am I looking at it in January, in April, or in July? And plan accordingly. Once you know how many hours of sun this is going to receive in winter and calculating how much it's going to receive in summer, then you can choose your plants. And your plants have got to be chosen according to if they're sun, shade or sunshade, and according to size. In a 6 foot by 7 foot border, you can't put something that's going to get massive. And don't see it in a little nursery pot like this and say, isn't that sweet? Because that's what happened with the oleander bushes. Someone bought a little one like this, and then it developed into 2 massive oleander trees. And of course, an oleander not only has huge going up, it has huge going down. It has a taproot the same width as the trunk going up. They are so difficult to remove if you have to remove them. In the future, will I ever need to pull this out? And if I never need to pull it out and it's got superficial roots, they can just wiggle and pull it out. That's great. If it's got a taproot like this, think about it twice, 3 times and maybe even 4. Don't forget to have a look either side at your neighbours' gardens. Do they have any, like a garage or a large shed or a large tree that's going to cast a shadow on that border? Even your own house. Is the garden long enough that it's not going to cast a shadow on that border? Or do you have to take that into consideration? Since you do have a blank canvas, choose your plants accordingly so they have interest all year round, especially in winter where there's not much else going. And look for variations in colours, the blues, the greys, the yellows and the reds, the chocolate brown. Beautiful variation of colour available. Choose them wisely and then space them out. Then you can fluff it out with other smaller perennials like Campanulas or Primulas. You can just spot them here and there to fluff it out, make it look pretty. But the main structure plants, look for the colour and the variation to have all around interest, preferably evergreen if possible. And finally, on choosing plants, choose a plant depending on who the gardener is going to be. Is it a newbie gardener or an experienced gardener? And even if it's an experienced gardener, do they have the time? Are they at that time in their life when they can dedicate X amount of time to a garden? If they don't have much time, choose something that virtually takes care of itself, or at least minimum amount of work. Then you always prepare the ground for planting. This is going to be different for everybody. If you've come from a blank slate where previously there'd been virtually nothing planted, you're away on a hack. You just add in the usual type of thing, planting fertiliser, and you're fine. If, in the case of my daughter's garden, it had 5 massive trees growing there for the last 30 or 40 years, plus 2 massive oleander bushes and all the little bits and pieces, it's obvious there's very little nutrients left in the soil. So I had to take that into consideration, bringing in a lot of nice, healthy topsoil. And if you yourself are finding yourself that you're going to plant an area that has had a load of trees with superficial roots, you're going to have an area that's chock-a-block full of roots, which is very difficult to plant in. So you've got to think outside the box. Those roots will eventually rot down. There's no question about that, but it takes time. So think outside the box. If I can't dig down, then go up and mound that lovely topsoil you brought in, then plant into that topsoil, and the plants will have just little extra time to get rooted in before hitting that harder, more complicated soil underneath. Don't leave the soil too fluffy. I mounded it and then packed it in. Then have a look to see what is already available in the garden. In this particular garden there were several rocks scattered all over the place. 2 of them look quite nice. I put those to one side. Then I brought in 2 rocks from my own garden and an additional one that I found in the countryside here where I live. There's a load of granite all over the place. So I said, if I'm going to mound it up, then I'm going to slot in some rocks, large rocks, to give the impression of a rockery. It's not a rockery, but it's more like a border, a mounded border with rocks in it. Because while those plants are growing and maturing, those rocks are going to give us some nice interest, visual interest. You also saw in the beginning of the video that the trees I had cut down had actually in 2 places broken through the wall. So that was repaired, and my son-in-law is now going to dedicate to paint that wall to make it all nice and uniform, remove that fence covering, which is very, very tatty. It's years and years old, and replace it with nice new fencing. So it's going to look spick and span. In about a month's time, I'll be returning there just to install an irrigation system. Quite simple, just one straight from the tap with a programmer on it, running it to the side of where the border starts, and then just a microtube, a perforated microtube in and out of those plants. And I'm going to leave it pre-prepared for that raised bed area as a future project, the one that goes up to the steps. Anyway, that's another project. For the moment, I hope you've liked this video and get the confidence to look at any blank space you've got in the garden and say, I can do this, and just go for it. For the moment, I'll see you back here in Granny's garden next week. Bye-bye now.